Hi, my name is Caitlin Beebe, and my presentation is on Robert Frost and his poetic imagery. Robert Frost was born in 1874 in San Francisco, but moved back to Massachusetts with his family after his father passed away and started writing poetry in high school and publishing them shortly after. Frost has written over 250 poems in his lifetime, included in his books and collections, and before his death was considered the unofficial poet laureate by the public. He famously read the poem The Gift outright at JFK's presidential inauguration, and he won 4 Pulitzer Prizes throughout his career. He died in 1963 at the age of 88, but not before becoming the most famous poet of his time. Poetic imagery is the use of figurative language and vivid imagery that appeals to the senses in order to create mental images in your head. Frost achieved this through his use of metaphors and symbolic language, especially in his rural poetry shown in his New England landscapes. The subtlety of the sensory image he creates is carefully woven with figurative language and combines this with classical structure and meter to fully express his ideas and meanings. A few examples of this are shown in his poetry, the first one being Birches. It's when I'm weary of considerations and life is too much like a pathless wood, where your face burns and tickles with the cobwebs, broken across it and one eye is weeping, from a twig's having lashed across it open. The face burning and being tickled with cobwebs are both examples of sensory detail that symbolize the narrator's old age, and the words like weary and pathless also evoke a more darker meaning of getting older. Another example is mending wall. Spring is the mischief in me, and I wonder if I could put a notion in his head. Why do they make good neighbors? Isn't it where there are cows, but here there are no cows? The first line, spring is the mischief of me, shows spring, use figurative language to show spring as almost the reason for his lively attitude and mischievous want to provoke his neighbor as they're mending the wall together. Lastly, out, out. The buzzsaw snarled and rattled in the yard and made dust and dropped snow-lank sticks of wood, sweet-scented stuff when the breeze drew across it. Another example of sensory details are shown with the smell of the sweet-scented stuff and the sound of the buzzsaw snarling and rattling, which is also use of personification that depicts the buzzsaw as a violent creature and foreshadows what the buzzsaw is going to do next in the poem. A review from Ezra Pound on one of Frost's books, A Boy's Will, says, has the tang of the New Hampshire wood, and it has just this utter sincerity. It is not post-Miltonic or post-Swinburnian or post-Kiplonian. This man has the good sense to speak naturally and to paint the thing as he sees it. Ezra Pound, who is also another poet of the modernist era, initially took Frost under his wing until they separated, but he helped him with a lot of his books. And Pound championed for the Imagist and Vorticist movement because of his concise and direct language he used in his poetry and his poetic clarity. He used word phrases that captured a sensory image as a whole, which is somewhat similar to Frost poetry as well. An example of Ezra Pound's poetry is in a station of the Metro, and it states, the apparition of these faces in the crowd petals on a wet black bough. Though it's only 2 lines long, it uses figurative language to clearly compare the people at a metro station to petals on a tree branch. The textbook states the final 2-line poem exemplifies Pound's 3 criteria for an Imagist poem: that the poem must treat things directly, eliminate unnecessary words, and use rhythm musically, not mechanically. Pound's imagery is similar to Frost because of how interwoven the sensory experiences put into the poem's overall meaning through figurative language and metaphor. Frost's poetic imagery is deeply part of his poetry, even though it's one element of the whole, and it's part of what makes him such a genius poet. Studying the imagery created by Frost helps us to understand his writing style, the meanings behind his work, and how we interpret them ourselves. Lastly, I have a quote from Robert Frost. It says, "The figure a poem makes. It begins in delight and ends in wisdom. The figure is the same as for love." And here are my sources. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.